The late afternoon light had just started to turn golden when I heard it. I was standing at the kitchen counter peeling carrots for soup, the radio playing low in the background, some old country station that faded in and out depending on the wind. The window above the sink looked out toward the tree line, maybe 80 yards from the back of the house, where the pines grew thick and dark even in summer. I'd lived here for 11 years, long enough to know every sound this property made. So when the porch groaned, that deep, heavy groan that comes from weight, real weight, not the pop of wood contracting in the heat, I stopped, not because I was afraid, not yet, because it was wrong. The creak came again, slower this time, deliberate. Whatever was out there wasn't running. It wasn't scattering like a deer startled at the edge of the yard. It was moving with intention, and it was large, and my brain, the part that had lived alone out here long enough to trust its instincts, told me quietly but clearly, that is not a dog. I set down the peeler, turned off the radio. The house went completely silent. Another sound, lower, almost like a breath let out through something much bigger than a chest I could imagine, and then, nothing, just stillness, the kind of stillness that has a shape to it. I walked to the front hallway. The old floorboards were cold through my socks. I pressed my back against the wall beside the door and just listened for a moment, my heart doing something strange and quick inside my ribs. My hand found the door handle. I told myself to open it slowly, to not make sudden movements. I don't know why I thought that. I don't know what I expected to see. I pulled the door open 2 inches, and then I stopped breathing entirely. She was enormous. That's the only word my mind could hold on to in that first second. Enormous, and dark, and impossibly real, standing on my porch boards in the amber late afternoon light, like something that had walked out of a world that had nothing to do with mine. A gorilla, a full-grown female, her coat the deep black brown of river mud, her shoulders broad and heavy, her hands, those hands resting lightly on the edge of the porch railing like she was just pausing, just resting. Beside her, pressed close to her left leg, were 2 babies. One of them looked up at me. I didn't move. I don't think I could have moved if I'd wanted to. My mind was doing something it rarely does. It went completely quiet. No thoughts, no plans, just the image in front of me, burning itself into my memory with a kind of terrifying clarity. The mother's eyes found mine. She didn't bare her teeth. She didn't charge. She didn't make the explosive bark I'd heard once years ago on a nature program that had sent me reaching for the remote. Instead, she did something I was completely unprepared for. She lowered her head, just slightly, just an inch or two, and let out a sound so low and soft it barely carried through the gap in the door. Not a growl, not a warning, something else entirely. I'd lived alone long enough to recognize the sound of asking. That's when I noticed the second baby, the one that wasn't pressed against her leg, the one that was standing a half step in front of her, slightly apart, like it had been placed there rather than wandered there on its own. It was smaller than the other one, thinner. Its coat was dusty, the way an animal looks when it's been moving hard through dry terrain, and it was swaying, just barely, the way a person sways when they're standing somewhere between awake and not. The mother nudged it forward with the back of her wrist, gently, the gesture so careful it made something tighten in my throat. Then she looked back at me. I heard myself whisper. I wasn't even aware I was going to speak. "You need help." My hand was trembling when I pushed the door open wider. Not all the way, just enough. I kept my body low and slow, the way you move around something wild when you want it to understand you're not a threat. I stepped out onto the porch, 1 foot, then the other, and I felt the boards take my weight, and I was suddenly aware of how exposed I was, how there was nothing between me and her except 8 feet of open air and whatever understanding she had decided to extend to me. She watched every movement I made. Her eyes never left me. I crouched down slowly, knees aching the way they always do now, and I got low enough to see the baby clearly. What I saw made my stomach drop. Its breathing was shallow, too shallow. Each breath looked like it cost something, and along its left side beneath the dust and the matted fur there was a wound, not bleeding badly, but raw, the kind of injury that doesn't announce itself loudly, the kind that quietly takes everything if you don't catch it in time. My mind shifted. Fear didn't leave, it never fully left, but something moved in front of it. Something steadier. The baby made a sound. Faint, almost nothing. The mother leaned down and touched it with 1 finger. The softest touch. Then her eyes came back to mine, and in that moment I understood, with a certainty I cannot explain, exactly why she had come here. I reached my hand out slowly toward the baby, and that's when the mother's head snapped up, body rigid, eyes locked on the tree line. From somewhere deep in the pines, distant but getting less distant, came a sound that did not belong to the forest. I didn't look toward the trees. Not yet. I kept my eyes on her because she was the only thing that mattered in that moment, and I had learned enough in those few minutes on the porch to understand that whatever calm existed between us was fragile, the kind of fragile that doesn't survive a wrong move. My hand was still extended. I hadn't pulled it back. Pulling back felt like the wrong message, so I held it there, steady as I could manage with my heart doing what it was doing, and I waited. The sound from the forest came again. Branches, voices, low, indistinct, the way voices carry when they're not meant to carry. Not hikers. Hikers don't move like that at dusk. Quiet and deliberate, close to the ground sounds. Something about the pattern of it made the hair on my arms rise. The mother heard it too. Every part of her was oriented toward those trees. Her shoulders had risen. Her breathing had changed. Faster, shallower, the breath of an animal making a calculation. I lowered myself the rest of the way to the porch floor, sat down fully, made myself small. She looked at me. I placed my hand, palm up, flat on the boards between us. Not reaching, not grabbing, just there. An offering maybe, or just a signal. I'm not moving. I'm not a threat. I'm staying right here. The baby swayed again, that same terrible quiet sway. And then slowly, so slowly that at first I wasn't sure it was happening, the baby leaned forward, tipped toward my hand like a plant leaning toward the only window in a dark room. The mother didn't stop it. That was the moment, that small exhausted lean. That's when I understood she had already made her decision before she ever climbed onto my porch. She hadn't come here by accident. She hadn't wandered. She had chosen this, chosen me, or chosen this house, or chosen whatever it was she believed existed here, that didn't exist anywhere else she could reach. I brought both hands forward, slow as I had ever moved in my life, and I lifted the baby. The mother rose instantly, one fluid movement, from stillness to standing, and the porch boards groaned under the shift of her weight. She took one step toward me, just one, and the sound of that single step, the heaviness of it sent a cold wave through my chest. I froze. Didn't pull back, didn't speak, just held the baby against my chest and went completely still, and let her read whatever she needed to read in my face and my body and my stillness. The baby made a sound, thin and reedy and exhausted. Something in the mother's posture changed, just slightly. The tension in her shoulders didn't disappear, but it shifted, reorganized itself from threat into something more like vigilance. She was still watching me. She would always be watching me. But she stepped back one step, and her breathing slowed by a fraction. And I took that as the only permission I was going to get. I stood carefully, turned toward the door, kept the baby close and warm against my chest, and then I heard her follow me inside. The sound of her crossing the threshold was unlike anything I can fully describe. The soft, heavy thud of knuckles on hardwood, the particular way the whole house seemed to register her presence, the way the air in my hallway changed. I didn't turn around to look. I just kept walking, slowly toward the living room, toward the couch where I'd already decided I would put the baby down. I set it on a folded blanket I pulled from the arm of the sofa. It was one of those old quilts, the kind with the thick batting that holds warmth. I arranged it quickly, got the baby settled in the center, and only then did I turn around. She was standing in my living room. In my living room. Between the bookshelf and the armchair my late husband used to sit in on Sunday mornings, there was a wild gorilla watching me with an expression I can only describe as total focused attention, not aggression, not fear, attention, the kind that misses nothing. I exhaled once, quietly. Then I went to the kitchen for the first aid kit and a basin of warm water and clean cloths, moving the way you move when you know you're being watched and you want every movement to say the same thing. I know what I'm doing. Trust me a little longer. The wound was worse up close, not life-threatening on its own maybe, but infected, the edges already showing the particular angry color that means the body has been fighting something for longer than it should have had to fight alone. The baby was thin beneath the fur, dehydrated. I cleaned the wound as carefully as I've ever done anything in my life, with warm water first, then antiseptic. The baby flinched and made that faint sound again, and then I wrapped it as gently as I could manage with my hands, which were not as steady as I needed them to be. The mother watched every single movement. She didn't pace, she didn't make sounds. She sat, actually sat, the way I'd seen large primates sit in documentaries, knees out, weight settled, and she observed me with an intensity that made me feel like I was being graded on something with very high stakes. Once, when I had to adjust my position and lean slightly closer to the baby than I had been, she made a sound, low, brief, a single note of warning that I felt more in my sternum than I heard with my ears. I pulled back an inch, nodded. I don't know why I nodded. It seemed like the right thing. She went quiet again. Outside, the sounds had gotten closer. Whatever was moving through those trees was not moving away. I could hear it clearly now. The specific sound of undergrowth being pushed through by something that wasn't particularly concerned about being heard. More than one person, moving with a kind of casual confidence that frightened me more than stealth would have. I reached for my phone and called the only person I could think to call, Dr. Rees, the wildlife veterinarian 2 counties over, who I'd met 3 years ago when a young black bear had wandered onto my property with a snare around its leg. His phone rang 4 times before he picked up, and when I told him what was in my living room, there was a silence on the other end that lasted long enough for me to count to 6. "Don't move it," he said finally. "Don't let it get cold. I'm coming, but Evelyn, I'm 90 minutes out. Maybe more. 90 minutes. The baby's breathing had worsened while I was on the phone. I could hear it now without having to lean close, a faint wet quality to each inhale that hadn't been there 20 minutes ago. The mother stood up. She looked at me, then toward the window, where the last gray light of evening was fading, and the sounds outside had gone suddenly, completely quiet, which was somehow worse than when they'd been moving. Then she looked back at me, and the expression on her face, if you can call it that, if that word is even allowed for what I saw, was the most human thing I have ever witnessed on a face that was not human at all. She couldn't stay. She knew she couldn't stay. Whatever was in those trees had changed that. But the baby couldn't be moved. Not yet. Not safely. And she knew that too. She looked at me one more time with that long, steady, unbearable gaze, and I understood with a clarity that went straight through me exactly what she was asking. The house had gone quiet in a way that felt different from before. Not peaceful quiet. Not the easy silence of an empty evening. This was the kind of quiet that has edges to it. The kind where you become aware of every small sound your own body makes. My breathing, the creak of my weight shifting on the floorboards, the faint wet labor of the baby's chest rising and falling on the quilt in front of me. The mother had moved to the window, not close enough to be seen from outside. She seemed to understand that, or maybe instinct understood it for her, but close enough to watch the tree line through the glass. Her reflection floated in the dark window beside her real face, and for a moment I saw both at once, and something about that image, the real and the reflected, both watchful, both waiting, settled into me in a way I couldn't shake. I turned back to the baby. Its breathing had changed again, shallower now, the small chest barely moving. I repositioned the quilt, tucking the warmth closer, and pressed 2 fingers lightly to the inside of its arm, the way Dr. Rees had once shown me, checking the pulse, faint, but there, still there. I told myself that mattered. I made myself believe it. But the wet sound in each breath was getting worse. I went back to the basin, wrung out a fresh cloth, and began warming the baby's hands and feet, the way you do with something that is losing its battle with cold from the inside out. Small circles, slow and steady. I talked while I worked, not loudly, not in any particular direction, just the low continuous murmur of a voice that wanted to say, "I'm here, I'm still here. Don't go yet." I don't know if the baby heard me. I don't know if it mattered, but the mother turned from the window. She crossed the room in 4 steps, 4 heavy, deliberate steps that I felt through the soles of my feet, and she stopped directly beside me, not behind me, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating off her body, close enough to smell the particular wild smell of her, like dark earth and something older than anything I had a name for, and then she sat down, right there on my living room floor, beside the quilt beside me, with the baby between us. She didn't touch it, she didn't push me away. She just sat, and her breathing slowed, and her eyes moved from the baby to my hands and back again, and the message was so clear it didn't need a single word to carry it. Do what you can. I'll be right here. I have lived 67 years. I have sat with people I loved while they were sick. I have held hands in hospital rooms and said the kinds of things you say when you don't know what else to say. I thought I understood what it meant to witness someone's fear for another person. I didn't. Not fully. Not until that moment on my living room floor with a wild mother sitting 3 feet away from me in the lamplight, watching my hands with those dark ancient eyes, trusting me with the one thing in her world that mattered more than her own safety. My throat closed. I kept working. The baby's position needed adjusting. Its airway wasn't fully clear, and I'd read enough, watched enough, paid enough attention over years of living near wild things to know that sometimes it's the simplest physical adjustment that makes the difference between a breath that comes and one that doesn't. I shifted it gently onto its side, supported the head, cleared the nostrils with the corner of a clean cloth. The mother leaned forward. I felt her go tense beside me, every muscle in that enormous body pulling tight, and I held absolutely still. The baby cradled in my hands and I waited. 1 second, 2. She made a sound, that same low, soft sound from the porch, the one I had decided in some part of myself I can't fully explain, meant something close to please. Then she leaned back. I finished the adjustment, and we waited together in the lamplight, the two of us, while the clock on the mantel marked off seconds that felt nothing like seconds. Outside, the forest had stayed quiet. Whatever had been moving through those trees had either stopped or moved on. I couldn't tell which, and I couldn't afford to spend the attention finding out. Everything I had was in my hands. Everything I had was on that quilt. The baby didn't move. I counted breaths. 12, 13, each one that same shallow, costly effort. 14. I pressed the warm cloth to its chest again, and whispered something, I don't even remember what, some small ordinary words, the kind you reach for when the real words aren't big enough. 15. And then on the 16th breath something changed. Not dramatically. Not the way it happens in films where the music swells and the eyes open wide and everything resolves in a single visible moment. It was smaller than that, a fraction deeper, a fraction steadier. The wet quality in the sound, that faint terrible rattling, had eased, just slightly, just enough that I noticed, just enough that my hands stopped moving and I held completely still and listened with everything I had. Another breath. Deeper still. The baby's hand moved. Just a curl of fingers. A small unconscious flex. The kind of movement a body makes when it's deciding, without fanfare, without announcement, to keep going, to stay. I put my hand over my mouth. I don't know when I started crying. I became aware of it the way you sometimes become aware of rain, not the moment it begins, but a few moments after, when it's already there. Tears on my face, quiet and steady, and my shoulders shaking with the effort of keeping the sound in, because the last thing I wanted was to startle anything in that room. I felt her looking at me. I turned my head, and she was watching my face, not the baby, my face, with an expression of such focused, unreadable attention that I almost looked away. But I didn't. I let her see whatever was there. The relief, the exhaustion, the gratitude so large it had nowhere to go but out through my eyes. She held my gaze for a long moment, then she looked down at the baby. It was breathing, steadily now, the small chest rising and falling with something approaching ease, the hands loosely curled, the body settling into the particular deep stillness of an animal that has stopped fighting and started resting. Resting is different from gone. Every part of me knew the difference, and every part of me exhaled at once. Outside, a branch snapped. Close, much closer than before. The mother was on her feet before the sound had finished, every trace of stillness gone, replaced by that coiled electric alertness I had seen on the porch. Head up, eyes toward the window, a low continuous rumble building in her chest that I felt in my back teeth. I stood too, slower, knees protesting, hands still warm from the cloths. We looked at each other across the baby on the quilt. I don't have the words for what passed between us in that moment. I'm not sure words were ever built for it. But something was communicated, something real, something complete, in the space between my face and hers, in the lamplight, in the quiet house, with the forest pressing in outside, and the clock still marking its seconds, and the baby breathing on the quilt between us. She couldn't stay. We both knew it now with a certainty that sat in the room like a third presence, but the baby wasn't ready to be moved. We both knew that too. I took one step back. She watched me. I sat down in the armchair, my husband's old chair, the one that still held the shape of him somehow, and I folded my hands in my lap and I looked at her, and I said quietly, with as much steadiness as I could find, I'll stay with her, I promise. The mother stood very still. Then she moved to the baby, lowered her face close, breathed in slowly the way animals do when they are memorizing something, when they are leaving a piece of themselves behind with something they cannot carry. She straightened, looked at me one last time, and walked out the door into the dark. The house felt different after she left. Not empty exactly. The baby was still there, still breathing on the quilt in the lamplight, and I was still there in the armchair with my hands folded in my lap and my heart doing something slow and stunned inside my chest. But the particular presence that had filled every corner of my living room for the past 2 hours, that enormous, watchful, ancient presence, was gone, and the absence of it had a weight of its own that pressed down on the room in a way I hadn't expected. I sat for a long time without moving. Outside, the forest was quiet again. Whatever had been moving through those trees had gone, or had stopped, or had decided for reasons I would never know, that tonight was not the night. The only sound was the clock on the mantel, and the soft, steady breathing from the quilt, and I listened to both of them with the particular attention of someone who has just been reminded, without a single word being spoken, how thin the line is between a breath that continues and one that doesn't. Dr. Reyes arrived at 11:14. I know the exact time because I looked at the clock when his headlights swept across the living room wall, and the numbers stayed in my mind the way certain numbers do after certain nights. He came through the door with his bag already open, already moving, and then he stopped in the middle of my hallway and looked at the baby on the quilt, and then looked at me sitting in the armchair, and he didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Tell me everything." I told him. The thuds on the porch, the door opening 2 inches, the mother standing in the amber light with those 2 small shapes beside her, The way she had followed me inside. The way she had sat beside me on the floor. The way she had left. He listened without interrupting, which is not something he usually does. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he crouched down beside the baby and began his examination, his hands moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who has spent 30 years doing this, and after a while he said without looking up, "You did good, Evelyn. You did real good." I didn't answer. I wasn't sure I trusted my voice. He stayed through the night. We took turns watching the baby, 2 hours on, 2 hours resting, and somewhere around 3 in the morning the breathing evened out completely, deep and untroubled, and Dr. Reyes looked across the room at me and nodded once, and that nod contained everything that needed to be said. By morning the baby was sitting up, not strong, not steady, but upright, looking around at my living room with the wide, dark, bewildered eyes of a creature trying to make sense of a world that had shifted beneath it without warning. It looked at the bookshelf, it looked at the lamp, it looked at me, sitting in the armchair with a cup of coffee going cold in my hands, and it held my gaze for a moment with an expression I can only describe as assessment, the same focused, unreadable attention its mother had turned on me the night before. I stayed very still. It looked away first. Dr. Reyes made calls that morning. Quiet, careful calls to people who understood situations like this, wildlife coordinators, sanctuary contacts, people who knew how to move through the particular tangle of regulations and practicalities that surrounds a wild animal in an unexpected place. There was paperwork. There were conversations I wasn't part of. There were decisions being made in the background that I understood were necessary and correct, and that I kept myself from thinking about too hard. Because every time I thought about what came next, I thought about her, out there somewhere in the pines, moving through the dark with the other baby pressed close to her side, alive because she had made a choice that I still could not fully comprehend. The choice to walk towards something unfamiliar, something large and strange and human, and to ask it for help with the most vulnerable thing she possessed. I thought about what that must have taken. I thought about it a lot in the days that followed. The baby was transferred on the 3rd day, early in the morning before the heat came. Ray's handled it, a short transport to a facility 40 minutes north, run by people he trusted, people who knew what they were doing. I watched them load the carrier into the back of the truck, and I stood on the porch with my coffee, and I watched the truck until it turned at the end of the road and disappeared. Then I went inside and washed the quilt. Life returned to its usual shape, the way life does. The radio in the morning, the soup in the evening, the walk down to the fence line and back before dusk. The ordinary rhythm of days that follow each other without drama or announcement. I was grateful for it. I have always been someone who finds comfort in routine, in the small familiar gestures that accumulate into a life. But I listened differently now. Every morning I sat with my coffee on the back porch, and I looked at the tree line, and I listened to the particular language of the forest. The birds first, then the wind in the upper branches, then the deeper sounds underneath, the ones that took years of living close to learn. I wasn't waiting exactly. I told myself I wasn't waiting, but I was paying attention in a way I hadn't before, with a quality of attention that had been given to me that night on the floor of my living room by a creature who had trusted me with everything. 3 weeks passed, then 4. On a Tuesday morning in early October, with the light coming low and gold through the pines and the first real cold of the season in the air, I heard it, soft movement at the tree line, not hurried, not cautious. I set my coffee cup down on the porch railing, and I stood up slowly, and I looked toward the edge of the trees, and she was there, standing at the boundary where the yard met the forest, in the long morning shadows, watching the house. She was exactly as I remembered, broad and dark and absolutely still, with that quality of presence that made the air around her feel different, and beside her, standing on its own 4 limbs with a steadiness that hadn't been there 3 weeks ago, was the baby, both of them. I didn't move, I didn't speak, I barely breathed. The baby took a few steps forward into the yard, not far, 4 or 5 steps, onto the open grass, into the morning light, and then it stopped and looked around with those wide, assessing eyes, and something in its posture was entirely different from the last time I had seen it. The weakness was gone, the sway was gone. It stood with a solidity, a groundedness, that made my throat close all over again. The mother watched it. Then she looked at me. I smiled. I couldn't help it. Not a large smile, not the kind that needs to announce itself, but the small, quiet kind that comes from somewhere deep and doesn't ask permission. The kind that means, I see you, I remember, I'm glad. She held my gaze for a long moment. The baby turned and walked back to her side, pressed close against her leg. She lowered her head and touched it briefly, that same single-finger touch I had seen on the porch that first evening, And then she straightened and looked at the house one more time, at me on the porch, with my cold coffee and my worn slippers and my 11 years of solitude that had just been permanently altered. And then she turned and walked back into the trees. She didn't look back. I had thought, when I imagined this moment during those weeks of listening and waiting, that the not looking back would feel like an ending, like a door closing. But standing there on the porch in the October light, watching the last movement of dark fur disappear between the pines, I understood that I had it backward. She didn't look back because she didn't need to, because whatever had passed between us that night, on the porch, on the floor, in the lamplight, in the silence, had already been completed, already been understood. There was nothing left unfinished between us, no question that needed answering, no reassurance left to give or receive. She had come to me with the most impossible kind of trust, and I had held it carefully, and now it was done, and the world had moved forward the way the world does, and that was enough, more than enough. I stood on the porch for a long time after she was gone. The light shifted. A bird started up somewhere in the pines, a white-throated sparrow, the kind that comes through in fall, and its song carried across the yard clean and clear in the cold air. I picked up my coffee cup. It was completely cold, but I drank it anyway. And I stood there at the edge of my ordinary life, in the quiet October morning, and I felt beneath the strangeness of it, beneath the grief and the relief and the wonder that I knew would take years to fully understand, something that I can only call gratitude. Not the simple gratitude of a good outcome, something older and larger than that, the gratitude of having been chosen, of having been found worthy of the most fragile, irreplaceable thing one creature can offer another: trust, given once, in the dark, on a porch at the edge of the woods, by someone who had no reason to trust me at all. I have never forgotten it. I never will.